Welcome to the Universal Peace Federation. My name is Ray Lapalkin, and I'd like to begin by reading a little bit about the Universal Peace Federation. It's a global network of individuals and organizations dedicated to building a world of peace in which everyone can live in freedom, harmony, cooperation, and prosperity. There are many critical challenges facing our world at this time, from poverty and climate change to conflict and inequality. At the same time, the rise of civil society initiatives and the expansion of Track 2 diplomatic efforts involving people-to-people relations provides new dynamics that can complement and support the work of governments in the search for solutions to our world's most pressing problems. UPF has developed a strong record of accomplishment. Our commitment to service, partnership, and cooperation are hallmarks of our work. Through forums, seminars, conferences, service programs, and interfaith peace initiatives, the Universal Peace Federation is building a global network of peace builders to contribute to a world of sustainable peace in which everyone can live in freedom, harmony, cooperation, and prosperity. And our three mantras are interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. So our program today is titled The Weight of Words, the Media's Role in Religious Freedom. And this is part 2. And we're talking about religious freedom, not just in the United States, but around the world, as really being a key necessity for the stability of any nation. Anytime people's freedoms are taken away, especially their spiritual values, then a lot of times totalitarian states can emerge. So the program today, we're going to be watching a presentation by Mr. Bobby Ross. You may know him. He's the editor-in-chief of the Christian Chronicle. So he will be talking about anti-religious bias in the media. So please enjoy the presentation.
And so we have representatives of the entire team with us today, and I'll introduce our next presenter. Mr. Bobby Ross Jr. is the editor-in-chief. I really apologize for the typos in all of our communications, but he is the editor-in-chief of the Christian Chronicle and a former religion writer for the Associated Press and the Oklahoman, right? Right. He writes a weekly newsletter on the best reads and top headlines in the world of faith for religionunplugged.com. In his 3-decade career, he has reported from all 50 states and 15 countries and won numerous national awards. His family includes his wife, Tammy, 2 sons, a daughter, 2 daughters-in-law, 2 perfect grandchildren, and an adorable bunny. He lives in Oklahoma City. So let's hear it for grandparents. Hoorah!
Yes, sir.
The floor is yours, Bobby, go.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to come and talk. And Joe Campbell, this is not going to be anywhere near as great or as detailed as him. He's a professional journalism professor and did a great job. I'll just, I guess, mainly talk from the perspective of someone who's been a journalist for a long time and covered religion for a long time, just kind of my personal perspective that maybe will give some insight into where journalists in general are coming from. I guess my first topic was how religious issues are dealt with in the media. And I thought I would start with just kind of discussing how I got into the whole realm of religion writing, because I grew up in the Churches of Christ. It's an a cappella fellowship of probably conservative Christians. Most members in the South, Tennessee, Texas, or where we're the strongest, and had got into journalism to cover like police and politics and general news. I never had any idea that I would cover religion. And then about 1999, I was working at the Oklahoman, which is the newspaper here in Oklahoma City, and had been there several years. And they came to me and said, hey, Pope John Paul II is coming to St. Louis in January of 99, and we'd like you to go cover that. And looking back on that, nearly a quarter century later, it's like, that was a great story, and I should have been real excited about that. But I think at the time I was like, I'm Church of Christ. I'm not I'm not a Catholic. What are people at my church going to think? I don't know a lot about Catholics. How am I going to do that? So I'll rush through the story a little bit, but it was, basically a little bit of leeriness about getting into the realm of religion coverage, because to me, journalism was politics and crime and things blowing up and that kind of thing. And religion was a different animal. And I didn't know how to go about covering religion and maintaining my own faith. And so I called one of my ministers and said, "Hey, they want me to go cover the Pope. Should I tell them no, or what do you think about this?" He said, "Are you nuts? That's a great story. That's what you do. You go write about things and you try to be fair. You try to be accurate. You try to be honest. And, nobody's ever accused you of agreeing with the city council or the state legislature just because you wrote a story about what they did or about what they believe." So long story short, I went and covered the Pope. There were tens and tens of thousands of people who had made a pilgrimage there from across the U.S. I learned a lot about Catholics. I wrote several front page stories. And one thing I learned in that experience was I felt like my faith, kind of the fact that I was coming from a faith background, kind of allowed me to understand where other people of faith were coming from, just because, we were coming from a common measure of faith being important in our lives, even if we didn't share the specific beliefs or the specific faith. So that was an eye-opening experience for me. And at this point, I always stop and say, I'm not saying you can't be an atheist and cover religion, because there's a lot of, there's some atheists that I know that are some really great religion reporters. So in my case, it's helpful that I'm a person of faith, but I'm not saying it's essential that you have to be a person of faith. I'll just quickly mention, I still freelance for the Associated Press. So I've done some stories in the last few months about the synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, where 4 people were held hostage about a year ago, and really had a great experience just talking to the rabbi and the men who were held hostage there at that church. And as a religion reporter, I basically, on some of what we discussed, I just acknowledged pretty openly, my background is Christian. You're going to have to explain some of this to me. I'm open-minded and I want to understand, but there are things that you're going to have to explain to me. And the other thing I recently did for AP was the dedication of a $50 million shrine here in Oklahoma City for the Catholic Church, where, even 25 years of covering Catholics off and on in various ways, there are still questions that I have to ask and familiarize myself with. But in general, it's just the way I've approached it is trying to be respectful toward people of faith. When you're doing a story, the advice, I go talk to an ethics class here in Oklahoma at a state university every semester. And basically I say, my go as a reporter, and what I think a fair journalist should do, is that when people read how they are reflected in a story, you should not only quote them accurately, but quote them in a way such that when they read the story, they recognize themselves in it. Because there's a way to quote people verbatim what they said and totally get wrong what they said. So I think that's crucial. I'll move on. I've got stuck on that first section. What can be done to educate members of the media on issues of religious freedom? I have just a few random ideas. I think in general, journalists are big fans of the First Amendment. We definitely like to promote the freedom of the press. So sometimes it might be helpful to remind them that the press isn't the only freedom that's covered there, that it also covers speech, assembly, freedom to petition the government, and yes, freedom of religion. Educating members of the media on religious freedom. I think that in the age we live in the US, that can be complicated because everybody's definition of religious freedom seems to be slightly different. And even terms like religious liberty have taken on political connotations, such that Terry Mattingly at Get Religion refers to it as scare quotes when journalists will kind of put quote marks around religious liberty as if it's not a thing that really exists. But so I guess what I'm saying is religious freedom is the freedom to practice your own faith, and it's the freedom to be free of forced religion in the public sphere. And as we've seen in the Supreme Court in the recent years, there's a lot more clashes there. So your definition of religious freedom and my definition of religious freedom may not always be the same. I've asked a few fellow religion writers about this question about what could someone do to educate members of the media on religious freedom. And at this point, I will point out that I'm a member of the Religion News Association, and the religion writers I'm most often dealing with are people who are doing this full time and are really committed to understanding religion and knowing about religion. So probably I'm getting somewhat of a skewed view of what a general person might be getting from the local city council reporter who suddenly there's a religion story and they're suddenly put on it and without a lot of expertise. But this one journalist said, as religious freedom has become an increasingly contentious topic, it's become more reasonable for reporters to avoid the phrase altogether. So if a faith group wants coverage of a specific plight, they should speak about the specific plight rather than using a broad description like our religious freedom is threatened. Another religion journalist who's one of the best and fairest reporters I know said, one thing I've learned is that most media outlets and news organizations don't care about, say, what's happening with Iran, but they do care about the Iranian community in their backyard. So she'd advise the people listening to this webinar to find a local tie-in if they can regarding religious freedom. She also points out that so many religious groups do not deal well with the media. For instance, they don't answer phone calls or emails for several days. She says, tell them that is a no-no, answer within the hour. One group that's really up their sophistication is the Jehovah's Witnesses. They are so much easier to talk with them before. That's true. I mean, I used to never hear from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and now they will even send direct messages on Twitter. How to overcome anti-religious bias in the media. Joe, I liked your 3 rules of religious understanding. I think those are very helpful. I guess as far as anti-religious bias, I think there is some anti-religious bias, but I think there's also just some disconnect between ordinary people, religious people, and the news media. I'll tell a story about I think that in the midst of COVID, I got into a conversation with a woman who was talking about the media being the enemy of the people, and she didn't trust the media, and the media is just out there to get you. And I said, well, Mom, you realize your son, your daughter, your son-in-law, that we're all journalists, and so you're talking about us. And she's like, no, not you, those other media people. So I think so. But anyway, the best, as far as anti-religious bias, Joe had great ideas. I think my advice would be just deal with people on a personal level, especially if you have the opportunity to connect with journalists on a one-on-one basis, get to know them kind of hopefully outside the arena of a crisis or a scandal, get to know them. And, Joel's Mormon, I'm Church of Christ. We both have some restoration roots, but we have a lot of different theology. But we spent time together there at Brigham Young, where they do have caffeinated Diet Coke, and I think that was a good experience for us. But I think just I've heard one prominent journalist used to always say every religion's really strange to those on the outside, and that's probably true. So it probably helps to get together with people and kind of just build some bridges. Sometimes anti-religion bias isn't bias so much as somebody did something really bad. A church or a religious group allowed sex abuse to children or something, and there's no way to spin a story like that positively. And I guess my bottom line, and as far as anti-religious bias and dealing with the media, because I'm dragging on too long is be responsive, like the reporter I quoted said. I mean, I don't think ignoring the media is going to help. I say be honest. My mother always taught me that if you're always honest, you never have to remember what you said to the previous person. I do think be strategic. When there's Google, you can figure out what somebody's reported in the past and how they reported it. And especially if it's a national story or a crisis story that's getting a lot of attention, you can find the person you feel like is going to be the fairest to you, because there are people that do have track records of being more advocates even in journalism than they are journalists trying to be impartial. I'd say be helpful, but be careful. Usually the interviews I do now, I record all of them. I would say if you're giving an interview to somebody, they're probably recording it. You should have a recording too. If you're emailing somebody in the media, you should expect that anything you say in an email is on the record. And I think I've taken my time, so I'll stop talking now, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bobby. That was wonderful. You took us from the ivory towers right onto the street, the life of a reporter. And I kept hearing you say the importance of honesty, and I was listening recently to a talk that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo gave at a religious freedom rally. And he said, whenever I dialogue with any of the world leaders, the first thing I told them is, I'm a Christian. And I want you to understand that. That's how I see the world, and that's where I'm coming from. So I think, that point that you made is really, really important.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that presentation, perhaps giving you new insight into the media, the journalism, and bias in the media. A couple of points that Mr. Bobby Ross had brought up was to deal with journalists on a one-on-one basis. In other words, he's mentioning to try to build a bridge or to develop relationships with journalists, rather than just saying that all journalists are bad or the media isn't telling the truth. A lot of times we can jump to conclusions, but really get to know the journalists, understand their background, and understand where they're coming from as well. So at the Universal Peace Federation, we have some core values and beliefs that I would like to read for you. Number one is God. We are one human family created by God, our heavenly parent. Number two is spirituality. The highest qualities of the human being are spiritual and moral in nature. Number three is family. The family is the school of love and peace. Number four is service. Living for the sake of others is the model for a peaceful society. And number five is unity. Peace comes through cooperation beyond the boundaries of ethnicity, religion, and nationality. So if these resonate with you, please get in touch with us. We have many associations within the Universal Peace Federation. The one program we're watching today has to deal more with media, but we have associations dealing with parliamentarians around the world, religious spiritual leaders, academicians, the business community, arts and culture. So many different aspects that we're trying to bring these people from around the world from different backgrounds, find commonalities, and work toward a world of peace. So please get in touch with us. Our information has been up there on the screen, and you'll see it at the end. And also, I'd like to offer a complimentary copy of the biographies of our co-founders of the Universal Peace Federation, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. So get in touch with one of us, and we'll send that out to you. Thank you so much.